Arx just got reincarnated into his favorite game. Sounds awesome, right? Well, except the villain he's supposed to defeat is completely obsessed with him. And now he's working for her? Will Arx rise to be a hero, or will he fall straight into her clutches? This Otome game was based on the kingdom named Celestia, and among many of its popular characters, Eleonore was the cruelest one of them all. She had committed the most outrageous crimes since she was the villain of this story. Apparently, Arc Leaford doesn't appear in name in any of the story's branches. So, in other words, he's literally a background character. Though it doesn't really seem to bother Arcs all that much, since when it comes to being reincarnated, the standard formula is to become unbeatable using the knowledge you had from your previous life. Though for some weird reason, he can only remember things related to this game, and other small details like him living in Japan. As for right now, he has no family, relatives, or even friends in this world, but rather lives as a carefree orphan. He wonders why he was even reincarnated here, and can only wonder what his life would be like if he were to be the main character with some amazing magic. Maybe he'd even be able to attend school with the other characters, and so he didn't lose hope, as there might just be a huge opportunity out there for him, even if he's just a powerless background character. But for now, he just wants to enjoy this world, and bro got straight to training, and never once took his life for granted, but rather kept at his routine so he could be prepared for anything. And just then, his opponent fell to the floor, and within a blink of an eye, the match had been decided, and Arx was the winner. Eventually, he ended up defeating every single adult from the village in a spar, making him the strongest one there. And bro even had the kids running up to him, straight up glazing him, mentioning how one day they'd want to train only so they could become just like him. But Arx couldn't bring himself to crush the little man's dreams, since he only really did it because he was bored. And since there aren't any online games laying around, he practically didn't have any other choice but to put his energy elsewhere. But thanks to his boredom, he ended up becoming a strong person. And even though he's not aiming to become a knight or anything like that, at least he'll be strong enough to get rid of monsters near the village. When approaching him, someone congratulated him on his victory, and it was none other than the director of his orphanage, who acknowledged his skills, as he's sure Arx will make a fine knight in the future. But Arx thinks it's a bit impossible for a commoner like himself, and that's when the director mentioned that someone as wise and strong as him could surely become one. And on that note, he actually had a favor to ask him. And at first, he was visibly confused. But once they dropped him off at the mansion, bro was shitting bricks, looking like he was about to apply for a job at McDonald's or something. Feeling out of place, he asked the director if they were really supposed to be there. But he simply told him that there was someone who wanted to see him, which might have been a bit hard to believe. But right as the door creaked open before them, then came someone walking in, apologizing for having them wait. Introducing Adalbert Ancinous, the count of this region. And once Ark had caught on, he damn near lost his mind, introducing himself plainly as Ark's Leafort. It's then that the Count Adalbert confirmed with the director if this was the boy they spoke about, and the director vouched for him as an incredibly capable child. Adalbert then directed his focus towards Arx, mentioning that he had a really important favor to ask him, requesting out of nowhere if he could become friends with his daughter. And bro was lost yet again. You see, the truth is, his daughter can be a bit possessive, something you might call a troublesome nature. And it's while Arx took a moment to think about it that all his past memories of this game came rushing in, allowing him to recall who the Count's daughter was. And before he could even answer, Adalbert asked his daughter to come in, introducing Eleonore Ancinous, the young lady with such lifeless eyes. And there's no doubt about it, Arx could never forget her from his previous life's memory. since she's this game's villainess who relentlessly harassed the protagonist out of sheer malice. The princess known for being the root of all evil, and not to mention the final boss. To think they wanted him to become friends with someone as crazy as her, and while pulling them closer together, her father assures them that they'll be great friends and recommends that they talk for a bit. They were sent to the garden to look around and get to know each other, when our boy decided to praise the well-maintained garden, and she simply replied that the gardener maintains it regularly. Dead silence had followed shortly after, and it was so awkward that Arx couldn't help but freeze up just thinking about it. Both he and Eleonore are around the same age, yet he isn't able to grasp how she's able to be so expressionless. Though he must admit, she's actually pretty cute. He had never seen such a beautiful girl with black hair and eyes before, and he can't help but be captivated by her. Still, I mean, you know, she's the damn villainess, so he really should lock in. But being lost in thought, he hadn't noticed at all that she had stopped. And when he did, he questioned if something was wrong. But Eleonore just remained quiet, which had him feeling tense while he walked over towards her. He mustered up the courage to suggest that if she's not feeling well, they could just return to the mansion right away. But then, almost out of nowhere, she mentioned that it's just as she suspected, that Arx doesn't actually want to be friends with her. He stood there at a loss for words, as Eleonore states that she understands. He doesn't want to be associated with someone as accursed as her. He tried to deny it, but Eleanor's convinced that everyone else feels the same, so it's fine if he were to just be honest about it. It's gotten to the point where she's used to the hateful remarks about her gloomy nature, and they even went as far as to spread rumors that only misfortune befalls those near her. Eventually, she started being called the cursed child, just for not having any light in her eyes, and everyone around her only sought to stay in good graces, hoping to earn favors from the noble's daughter. But a single glance from her sent chills down the spine of anyone who dared to meet her eyes. She even got smacked across the face by her own magic instructor, who was startled by her destructive magic power. After that, not a word was ever spoken to her again, and people only gave her hateful glances. It's as he stood there in shock, he realized he had never learned anything about her background from the game, but she claims to have gotten used to this life, because she knows that's the right way to react. And as she reached out her arm, her fingers brushed gently against a rose, and it wilted at her touch. And before Arx could even react, a surge of destructive mana swept right past him, and its sheer force was unlike anything he had ever felt before. She admits that everything she touches loses its color and dies, be it plants or people, asking if he really understood it now, that Eleonore Ancinous was a cursed child. He never knew she had endured such treatment, and if that's the reason she became a villainess, he wonders if he were to save her now, if he could possibly change her fate. Even though it was her father, Count Adalbert, who asked him to befriend his daughter, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the very reason he'd been reincarnated here. And it's then that he decided that he'll be the one who'll put the story back on track, so that he can reach this world's happy ending. But in order to do that, he had to first become close with Eleonore and avoid the bad ending where everyone ends up unhappy, including her. And while his voice reached out to her, he mentions not finding her appearance creepy at all, nor does he fear her in the slightest, but instead, he thought she was unbelievably beautiful. So much so that it felt as if Cupid himself had struck her through the heart. But she still doesn't want to end up hurting anyone, so she thinks it will be better if he doesn't get involved with her. Arx admits he can't completely deny that possibility, but he also believes there's a better way to use that power first. And while he raised his arm above the wilted flower, he commanded it to bloom, and it slowly took its previous form, all while reassuring her that even if she ends up hurting someone, he'll find a way to handle it, and requested if she'd like to be his friend instead. Whispers rose around her, "You devil," along with the pleading of someone warning others to stay away, calling Eleonore a filthy crow. It was when she finally opened her eyes that a shadow-like figure formed her mother. Relieved, she ran over to her, trembling with fear she had carried all this time. But her mother stared down towards her with cold eyes, warning her to stop. Stop looking at her with those eyes of hers, before shortly after vanishing before her. And as Eleonore whispered an apology for ever being born, she gasped for air as she awoke from her nightmare, with Ark standing over her, asking if she was okay. How it seems she was having a terrible dream. She tried to remember when she had fallen asleep, but Arx reminded her that they had been talking in her room for a while, and she had suddenly drifted off from exhaustion. He figures that must have been why she had a bad dream. But when she was unresponsive, he drew closer as he called out to her once more, and noticed she had tears welled up in her eyes. Worried he might have done something wrong, he hesitantly stepped closer, and while she quickly hid her face in embarrassment, he was unsure of what else to do in the moment. But he followed his instincts and pulled her into a gentle hug. And as her heart began to beat louder, she remembered Ark's earlier confession of wanting to be her friend. It was earlier that very same day that Eleonore mentioned that if he were to be around someone like her, he'd only be unhappy, and how she might just end up hurting him in the process. But Arx assures her that no one goes through this life without hurting other people, even if they didn't mean to. And while squeezing the hem of her garment, she's adamant that he'd be better off with someone other than her. Arx made the final move and grabbed her by the shoulder, declaring that he only wanted her. For Eleonore, that moment was carved into her heart right then and there. And while she struggled to find her words, she turned to face him and kindly requested that he takes good care of her from now on. And that brings us to the present. Eleonore again apologizes for causing him to worry, but Arx made it clear she had nothing to be sorry about. Plus, both he and his chest would always be available for her. It's as she smiled and praised him for being so kind that Arx mentioned he was just doing what any friend would do. And then, almost out of nowhere, she lowered her head and admitted that before this, she'd never had anyone she could truly call an ally, let alone a friend, wondering if she'll ever be able to measure up to being a friend like him. But Arx yet again assures her that it's fine, as friendships typically take a long time to form, so he often just goes with what feels right to him. And with time, as she naturally makes more friends, she'll figure things out, since in his opinion, communication takes practice and repetition. And as she gazed at him in adornment, she softly smiled back at him, as he insists they take things slowly. After all, life is much longer than they realize. And just a few weeks later, Bro was about to be eating his own words, as Eleonore tries to get his attention, since she was finally able to use magic to make flowers bloom. But not only that, she had cheerfully offered him pastries once, and another time, they would share the quiet beauty of a starlit night. And even he's unable to believe how much he's changed in such a short time. But being caught up in his own thoughts, he hadn't noticed she had been calling out to him this whole time, asking if he was even listening. But Bro's still not locked in at all, since the only thing he can think about is just how cute she is, and quickly apologized, as it seems he was just a bit lost in thought. And as she began to pout, she asked if there was something more important than the question she had asked him. And well, of course not, since to him, there's nothing more important than Eleonore to him. And it seems that might have done the trick, as now she's all hot and bothered by his recent compliment. And believe it or not, Arcs is actually considered quite handsome. And while she pushed him towards her wardrobe, she insists he hurries up and tells her what clothes he likes. And while he thought about his own taste in clothing, then came a knock at his door, with her father requesting to have a moment with Arcs alone, mentioning that he'll only be borrowing him for a bit. And as Arcs made his way towards the door, he couldn't help but glance back towards her and noticed Eleonore was beyond pissed. But like the typical tsundere, she mentioned that it didn't matter, since Arcs had actually been absent-minded this whole time. And taking the moment to walk over towards her, he leaned in real close, reminding her that if it's something she wears, it would look beautiful on her regardless. And with a smile, he waved at her as he made his way over towards her father. And it's once he was settled in the count's office that Adalbert mentioned that his request had been approved, and starting next week, he'll formally be a part of their household. But it had Adalbert thinking, asking if Arcs really was okay with this. But apparently, he had given it some deep thought, since now he wouldn't be required to travel there. Plus, he's also grateful he had gotten the job. But if that's the case, Adalbert wouldn't have mind to just provide Arcs with a place to stay. But Arcs insisted it be this way, as he had no intention of exploiting Count Adalbert's authority in any way, which had shocked the Count, since he never expected a 7-year-old to say something like that. But Arcs knew all too well that it was because Adalbert had recognized him first and seen his true nature. That's what pushed him to choose Arcs to be Eleonore's friend. And if he understood that much, then it would save him the trouble of explaining. And as Arcs assures him that he'll do his best, there was one thing he really wanted to do next. As Eleonore sat pouting in frustration, waiting for her dear Arcs to return, he peeked through the cracked door and could already tell she was still upset. And right as he knocked, letting her know he was coming in, she exclaims that he was late, leaving her to worry and wait for his arrival. And as he apologized for his tardiness, he knelt before her, as Arcs Leafort was now reporting for duty. And from this day onward, he'll be serving as her attendant. On this fateful day, the whole hall was decorated for celebration, and all the maids and butlers of the household were busy managing the main hall's preparation arrangement. While Arcs, on the other hand, was exhausted. It has been 3 whole years since the last chapter, and Eleonore was about to turn 10 years old. It turns out in this world, milestone ages in multiples of 10 are lavishly celebrated, and it seems this is Arc's first time attending a noble's party, when suddenly someone informs him that the preparation for the halls have been completed. He thanks the young maid before him, and she noticed he seemed quite tired, but Arcs mentions that it's to be expected, since it's the day before the event after all. But really, it's all thanks to him why they're fully ready for tomorrow. For some weird reason, despite Arcs being only 10 years old himself, he had been put in charge of this entire party, so he had to run all over the place, while also giving orders to everyone else. But if we're being honest, it's mostly his fault. He gave his suggestions to the one who was in charge, who then placed him in charge. Their maid continues to mention just how amazing Arcs truly is. Not only does he have great ideas, but he also takes initiative and acts on his own. But to be honest, it's really all just for Eleonore. It's their first ever party since they met, and he wanted to celebrate it in a big way. And for that, he'll endure being a bit tired. And while reaching out his hand, he summoned a stone sword out of thin air and mentioned that he was off to train. And she might be right, because wasn't he just exhausted like a moment ago? But applying healing magic on himself, bro was beaming and ready to go, mentioning that he'll see her tomorrow. It was late that very same night that Arx had been practicing his slashes for hours now. When drenched in sweat, he figured that that was enough training for the day. When calling out to him from a distance, Eleonore had been standing patiently watching him practice for hours, and he was so in the zone, he genuinely hadn't noticed her at all. He couldn't help but wonder why she'd put herself through that, knowing she could have caught a cold. But if that's the case, she wants to know if he'd warm her up if she did. But bro's so dense, he wonders why she'd need him for that, since there are literally spells out there that can start a fire or raise body temperatures. Plus, she knows how to cast those kind of spells herself, so she really wouldn't need him for that. But that wasn't the only thing on her mind, since recently, he hasn't come to visit her much. But Arx swears he just spoke with her the other day. Regardless, she needed him to remember he belongs to her. And since he's her servant, she wants him to be by her side more. And even though he'd love to, he had honestly been too busy lately. It's then that he slipped his gloves on and knelt before her, brushing his lips lightly against her fingers, since it was all in preparation for tomorrow, for the magnificent celebration they would give her. And as she turned away blushing, she mentioned that it couldn't be helped. It's then that Arx recommend that they head back inside, since it really is cold. But seizing the opportunity, Eleonore wanted to ask if he had been feeling lonely lately, more than likely projecting how it is she had been feeling without him. But bro deadass said not at all, since the servants and the maids have been very kind to him. And since she couldn't believe what she was hearing, she immediately stomped off frustrated, all while Arx wonders if he had said something wrong. It's then that she had suddenly sneezed, and without delay, Arx decided to use his magic to raise her body temperature, when really, all she probably needed was a hug. The very next day, Count Adalbert decided to thank everyone for coming, when suddenly, his eyes had darted over towards Arx to eliminate any and all pests that tried to come close to his daughter. And both of them must have been locked in, because I don't know how Arx got that from one glance. But then he noticed two young lads standing together, and how it feels as though he's seen them somewhere before, when suddenly one of them had gazed in Arx's direction, causing him to turn his head swiftly as to not be caught, and wonders to himself if they had by any chance noticed his stares from earlier, when suddenly they had somehow disappeared. But now it was time for the main event, welcoming the star of the show. Feast your eyes on the radiant beauty, Eleonore. And as she came into view, she drew the attention of every man in that room, including Arx. And as their eyes met, they both softly smiled back at each other. And Arx can't help but think how incredible she looks. He knows he's in charge of overseeing everything today, but he can't help but feel as though it's all a shame he's gonna be by her side. When whispering his name, the maid from earlier had caught his attention, and as he ran over to ask what had happened, well, let's just say it all came to this somehow. He was right by her side as he wanted earlier, but all the stares from everyone in attendance had been drilling him all night, and he's sure they must all be wondering who the hell he was, when suddenly Eleonore noticed he looked pale, asking if he was alright. But now shots are being fired because he claims it's all her fault, and as she sat there pouting, she mentioned that it's all because Arx was supposed to be her attendant, but he's somehow never by her side. But he argues that even if that's the case, there's no need for a mere servant such as himself to sit beside the main guest. And to her, Arx isn't just any servant. Besides, she thinks Arx should be celebrating with her as well, since he is the same age as her. Yet no one's celebrating his birthday. But that's mostly because Arx doesn't know his birthday. he never had the opportunity to properly celebrate it, and figures that that's probably what she had meant this whole time. And that's probably why she had him sit right next to her as an equal guest of honor. To think that this girl had such negative thoughts towards herself and others, but yet she's grown into someone with such a beautiful heart. How there's no way she could be the final boss of this story. Finally understanding how she might feel, he mentions how much of an honor it is. But he'd honestly rather have her be celebrated instead, as that's more than enough to make him happy. And as he made her heart flutter once again, she requested that he spend some time with her after this. But it had him thinking of ensuring her party ends in a success, and couldn't help but wonder about the two boys who had disappeared earlier, hoping that somehow nothing happens, all while one of them stares at them from a distance with a crooked smile. With a gourmet meal spread before them, Eleonore leaned in closer, asking Arx if he had tried any of the dishes set out before them. But she didn't stop there. She wanted him to try them all. While Arx, on the other hand, is realizing that he's stuck. Plus, he's being stared at like crazy. And right as he asked her to hold on for a sec, a young man had approached them, requesting that Eleonore comes and dance with him. It's in that moment Arx recognized him. It was the same young man who had spotted him earlier. That's when his memories began to flood in, and the face from the game becomes clear. The young man before him was none other than Razer Kilmon, the Viscount's son. And since he's much younger than he was when the game originally started, Arx wasn't able to recognize him right away. He's known for having a foul mouth along with a violent personality, but he's extremely devoted towards the protagonist, and that gap makes him really popular. And not only that, but he's also a potential romance option in this game. And while Razer approached the two, he mentioned yet again that he liked to dance with Eleonore, and she straight up shut bro down. It's as his temper flares, he snaps, demanding to know why. But to her, the answer was obvious. She has no desire whatsoever to dance with someone like him. Besides, her mans is right beside her. Razer, stung by the insult, reaches out to grab her. But before his hand could touch her, Arx catches his arm in a firm grip. And as Arx slowly lifted his head, his eyes locked onto Razer with a piercing gaze, causing him to stumble back in shock. It's then that Arx took a moment to introduce himself, as he's none other than Lady Eleonore's attendant. And as Razer snaps back, mentioning that Arx should know his place, he squeezes even harder, as it's his job to protect Eleonore, and he intends on fulfilling his duty. It's then as Razer shudders in fear, explaining that he was simply asking to dance with her, and that's all. And while Arx tries to de-escalate the situation, he mentioned that if Razer continues to act the way he was, it would only bring shame to his family. But if he were to ever harm the daughter of a high-ranking noble, or even her servant, it would surely be a problem. And as Razer took a moment to think about it, Arx realized he might not be a complete idiot after all, but rather he's just a spoiled brat. I mean, yet again, for a rich 10-year-old, I guess the way he's acting is just about right. And as Arx recommends he withdraws or else, Razer finally gives in, mentioning that he got it. And right as Arx decided to let go of his arm, a devious smile came across Razer's face, as he quickly spun around, grabbing a hold of Arx instead. And right as he was about to ask what he was doing, Razer straight up sucker punched him right in the jaw. It's as Arx slowly fell to the floor, he could only think what a pain it all was. It's then that Razer drew his fist back once more to deal yet another blow. But Arx calmly placed forth his hand and commanded him to sleep. Instantly, the young man's eyes grew heavy, and his body gave in as he plopped right onto Arx's lap, sound asleep. Without missing a beat, Arx turned his gaze towards their maid, requesting that she calls forth both Razer's father and Count Adalbert as well. It's then as he passed Razer's unconscious body over to their house's servant that then came Eleonore rushing over, giving Arx the opportunity to ask if she was hurt by any chance, but she didn't want him to worry about her. Instead, she took the opportunity to gently caress his wound, asking if he was okay, since it seemed it had been swollen. But Arx simply placed his hand against his cheek and casted a healing spell, and within an instant, his bruise had faded, and it really wasn't a big deal at all. It's while Arx ran over to meet with the other servants, Eleonore patiently watched him as he went. It was a little while after in the Count's office, someone fell to their knees, groveling before Arx's feet, begging him to forgive his little brother. And as Arx assures him not to worry about it, he asked him to please raise his head, and it was none other than Caesar Kilmon, who's also a potential love interest in this game. He is the gentle, well-spoken prince archetype, who's also ranked at the top in terms of popularity. Arx couldn't help but think how tough it must be to have such a troublesome little brother. The truth is, Razer has been spoiled rotten, operating under the assumption that he's entitled to anything he wants. And if that's the case, he must have really wanted to dance with Eleonore after all. And it had him wondering if Razer was some kind of preschooler or something. Well, I mean, yeah, he actually is. Apparently, Caesar told him he was allowed to ask out any girl that caught his eyes. And bro really said he wanted Eleonore. Arx couldn't help but glance over at Razer while he slept on the couch and asked what would happen to him now. And apparently, it really all depends on the Count Adalbert's wishes. But more than likely, he'll be exiled. But as he rose to his feet, Arx was taken by surprise that they'd go that far. But realizing the commotion he had caused, he quietly sat back down, thinking to himself that having Razer exiled might actually be pretty bad. And even though he's just 10 years old, in this world, that's considered somewhat of an adult. So it's only fair he's given such treatment for his actions. But at this point, the Viscount Razer Kilmon's route seems to have been officially closed. And he wonders if this world was starting to diverge from the game's main story. And if that's the case, he really hopes Eleonore's fate can change as well. It's shortly after that Eleonore ran inside the room, calling out to Arx as she wanted to know if everything was alright, since he had been gone for so long. But he assures her that he's perfectly fine. And since there were a few witnesses belonging to the Kilmon family, it just took a while for them all to apologize to him. It's when she finally had been caught up that Arx wanted to apologize to her as well, since he never meant to ruin her birthday party. But Eleonore, on the other hand, thinks he shouldn't be apologizing, but rather it's all because of that bandit of a man and his outrageous behavior earlier. But even so, he still thinks he should have been able to prevent this all from happening. If only he had remembered sooner, or rather, he should have properly checked their guest list, potentially removing him before he had even sent the invitation. But calling out to Arx, Eleonore took a step closer to him and gently placed her hand on his face, reminding him that as long as she has him, she doesn't care about anyone else. But then quickly realized how bold she had been acting as she gasped out loud and stutters that the party hasn't been ruined just yet. It's as she spun around to head towards the door, she asked if he'd like to go outside for a bit. Yo, it's your boy Noodles, and I hope your day has been going great so far. But if you want to check out more peak fiction, then check out how this office ice queen fell for him after getting drunk. And I'll see you guys on the other side.